August 7th, 1942, 6:14 a.m. Henderson Airfield, Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Colonel Kiyoshi Ichiki crouched in the dense jungle undergrowth, binoculars pressed against his eyes, watching American Marines unload supplies from landing craft. Among the crates of ammunition and medical supplies, he observed something that made him smirk with contempt. Case after case of what appeared to be candy bars, chewing gum, and chocolate rations. Here's the twist everyone gets wrong about American soft soldiers. They weren't soft at all. They were being systematically overfed to create the most dangerous fighting force the Pacific had ever seen. Stay for the moment when Japan's most elite commander discovered what 4,000 calories per day could do to a man in combat. What Ichiki didn't know was that those chocolate bars represented the culmination of the most sophisticated military nutrition program in human history. The mathematics of caloric warfare were already written in the Pentagon's classified studies. Each derationed chocolate bar contained exactly 600 calories of concentrated energy, designed by Hershey's chemists to withstand 120-degree heat, while delivering sustained combat performance for 72 hours. This wasn't candy, it was weaponized nutrition. The Type A field ration represented America's industrial approach to human fuel, 4,268 calories per day, compared to Japan's 2,400-calorie rice-based diet. While Japanese soldiers had been conditioned for centuries to fight efficiently on minimal sustenance, Americans had created something unprecedented, the world's first overfed army. Here's what's insane about this. They were treating food like ammunition. Among the 11,000 Marines that morning were men who would become legends of amphibious warfare. But on August 7th, they were simply well-fed Americans carrying 80-pound packs with the casual efficiency of factory workers. Each man's gear included not just weapons and ammunition, but luxuries that would have seemed impossible to any army in history. Cigarettes, coffee, canned peaches, and enough chocolate to sustain a Japanese soldier for a week. This story reveals how industrial abundance defeated warrior tradition, and how Japan's confidence in spiritual superiority turned to bewildered terror when they discovered what American logistics could really do to the human body in combat. But wait till you see what happened when those chocolate-fueled Marines encountered Japan's most elite jungle fighters. 3 weeks later, in the pre-dawn darkness of August 21st, Colonel Ichiki led 900 men of Japan's elite 28th Infantry Regiment, the same unit that had captured Hong Kong, in what should have been a routine night assault against the American perimeter. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the Ichiki detachment, hand-picked veterans who had never known defeat, men who could march 30 miles on a handful of rice and still fight with samurai ferocity. At 1:30 a.m., they struck the Marine positions along the Ilu River with the precision of a surgical blade. The initial assault should have shattered the American line. It had worked against British forces in Malaysia, Dutch forces in the East Indies, and American forces in the Philippines. But something was different this time, devastatingly different. The Marines didn't break, they didn't retreat. Instead, they absorbed the Japanese charge like a sponge absorbing water, then compressed and exploded outward with a violence that defied everything Ichiki understood about warfare. These Americans were fighting with an intensity and endurance that seemed physically impossible. They were throwing grenades with the casual efficiency of assembly line workers, firing their garons with mechanical precision, and when Japanese soldiers closed to bayonet range, the Marines met them with a savage enthusiasm that was almost cheerful. By dawn, 800 of Ichiki's 900 men lay dead on the sand. The colonel himself, wounded and facing the complete annihilation of his elite unit, committed seppuku rather than report this impossibility to Tokyo. But this was just the beginning of Japan's education in American industrial warfare. Colonel Ichiki had spent 18 months studying American military capabilities, and his conclusions were shared by every expert in the Imperial Japanese Army. Americans were soft, overfed, mechanically dependent soldiers who would crumble under the spiritual pressure of Japanese warrior culture. This wasn't racism, it was mathematical analysis based on documented evidence. The Americans had demonstrated their weakness repeatedly. In the Philippines, they had surrendered at Bataan despite overwhelming numbers. In Java, they had collapsed without significant resistance. Their soldiers were recruited from a civilian population that had never known hardship, never experienced the purifying discipline of martial culture. They carried more equipment than a Japanese soldier could lift, relied on machines for everything, and worst of all, they seemed more concerned with comfort than victory. Ichiki had read the intelligence reports with professional satisfaction. American field rations included coffee, cigarettes, candy, and canned fruits, luxuries that betrayed a fundamental misunderstanding of what warfare demanded. While Japanese soldiers achieved spiritual purity through deliberate deprivation, Americans were attempting to fight a war while maintaining the soft lifestyle of peacetime civilians. The colonel's own background reinforced this analysis. Born in 1892 to a samurai family, he had dedicated his life to the perfection of military discipline. His men could march farther, fight longer, and endure more hardship than any soldiers in the world. They had proven this across Southeast Asia, where superior spirit had consistently defeated superior material. The upcoming battle would simply be another confirmation of eternal truths about warfare and character. His wife's last letter, received just before embarking for Guadalcanal, had expressed confidence in his mission. The ancestors watch over you as you teach these Americans the true meaning of sacrifice. Ichiki carried that letter in his breast pocket, certain that spiritual strength would triumph over material weakness just as it always had. What Ichiki couldn't have known was that those seemingly ridiculous American rations represented the output of the most sophisticated nutrition science program in military history. The US Army Quartermaster Corps had spent 3 years and $2 million developing what they called combat nutrition optimization, the systematic engineering of human performance through food. The derationed chocolate bar alone was a marvel of industrial chemistry. Hershey's had created a formula that packed 600 calories into a 4-ounce bar that wouldn't melt at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, wouldn't freeze at 40 degrees, and would remain edible for 3 years. Each bar contained precisely calibrated amounts of sugar for immediate energy, protein for sustained muscle function, and fat for long-term endurance. This wasn't candy, it was fuel, designed to specifications more exacting than aircraft engine oil. The complete American field ration delivered 4,368 calories per day compared to the Japanese soldiers' 2,400-calorie rice allocation. But the real breakthrough wasn't quantity, it was quality. American nutritionists had discovered that protein intake directly correlated with combat effectiveness. A Marine consuming 120 grams of protein daily could fight 40% longer and recover 60% faster than a soldier on a rice-based diet. The surprise element that would have shocked Ichiki was the scale of production. By August 1942, American factories were producing 1.2 million D-rations daily, enough to feed the entire Japanese army. The Hershey plant in Pennsylvania alone was outputting more chocolate than the entire Japanese food industry combined. Workers in Milton, Pennsylvania, many of them women who had never seen a battlefield, were manufacturing 24 million chocolate bars monthly with assembly line precision. This wasn't just engineering, it was industrial warfare. America had weaponized abundance itself, turning factory efficiency into battlefield superiority. The Marines hitting Guadalcanal weren't just soldiers. They were the mobile extension of American manufacturing power. The numbers were staggering, but the human cost was even more shocking. By the time Ichiki's men encountered those chocolate-fueled Marines, the industrial gap had become a biological chasm. American soldiers were arriving in the Pacific carrying more calories in their personal gear than Japanese soldiers consumed in a week. Consider the mathematics of abundance. Each American infantry division consumed 650 tons of supplies daily, including 200 tons of food. A single Marine regiment on Guadalcanal was eating more protein in one day than an entire Japanese division received in a month. The Americans were shipping ice cream machines to forward bases while Japanese soldiers were reduced to eating tree bark and grass. Pattern interrupt. Here's the human element that reveals everything. Private First Class Robert Leckie, a Marine machine gunner, wrote in his diary that he threw away more food in 1 week than his father had seen during the Great Depression. Meanwhile, captured Japanese diaries described soldiers hallucinating about rice, dreaming of single grains, fighting over scraps of seaweed. The logistical comparison was beyond comprehension. America was delivering 4,000 tons of supplies daily to Guadalcanal via the Cactus Express, fast destroyer runs that brought ammunition, medicine, and most impossibly, fresh meat and vegetables. Japan, controlling the surrounding seas, could barely deliver 200 tons monthly to their forces. Their soldiers were receiving ammunition without food, reinforcements without supplies, orders without hope. Hook. The numbers were mathematical proof of industrial superiority, but the psychological impact was devastating beyond calculation. By September 1942, the resource disparity had created a form of warfare that Japanese military doctrine couldn't comprehend. While American forces were complaining about the quality of their hot meals, Japanese soldiers were dying of malnutrition-related diseases faster than they were dying in combat. Captain Oda Tsuneo, intelligence officer with the Japanese 38th Division, documented the impossible reality in his classified reports to Tokyo. The enemy appears to possess unlimited supplies of everything. Their wounded are evacuated by aircraft to hospitals with surgical facilities superior to those in mainland Japan. Their soldiers discard equipment we would consider precious beyond measure. They fight as if material concerns do not exist. The strategic implications were becoming clear to Japanese commanders who understood logistics. Major General Kawaguchi Kiyotake, preparing his own assault on Henderson Field, calculated that his men were operating at 60% combat efficiency due to inadequate nutrition, while American forces appeared to be performing above baseline human capability. This wasn't just about food, it was about the complete industrial ecosystem. American forces had portable hospitals, air conditioning units, washing machines, and communication equipment that functioned flawlessly in tropical conditions. Japanese forces had courage, discipline, and weapons that were increasingly ineffective against an enemy who seemed to fight with the backing of an entire industrialized continent. The emotional peak came in intercepted radio transmissions from Japanese forward observers. They eat hot food while under artillery fire. They have lights at night. They waste ammunition on single targets. We cannot understand how this is possible. The growing desperation was evident in every communication. Japan's most experienced commanders were facing something beyond their comprehension. The psychological collapse began with small observations that accumulated into existential terror. Lieutenant Nishida Susumu, a veteran of the China campaigns, documented his growing comprehension in diary entries that would later be recovered from his body. August 30th. The Americans have discarded canned peaches along their perimeter. Whole cans, unopened. Our men risk death to retrieve them. September 3rd. Enemy machine gunner observed eating chocolate while firing, maintaining sustained fire for 20 minutes without pause for ammunition change. This should not be physically possible. September 8th. Captured American field pack contained more medical supplies than our entire company possesses. Single soldier carrying antibiotics worth more than colonel's monthly salary. The climax came during what became known as the Battle of Edson's Ridge, when Major General Kawaguchi led 3,000 men in Japan's most carefully planned assault on Henderson Field. The attack failed not due to American tactics or superior weapons, but because Japanese soldiers, weakened by months of inadequate nutrition, simply lacked the physical endurance to sustain combat against well-fed Marines. Kawaguchi's final radio transmission before withdrawing captured the moment of complete realization. We are not fighting soldiers. We are fighting an industrial system that has converted factory production into human combat capability. Our warrior spirit cannot overcome their material abundance. The human drama reached its peak in a letter Kawaguchi wrote to his wife, never sent but found among his papers after the war. I have commanded soldiers for 20 years, but I have never seen men fight like these Americans. They fight as if they believe victory is inevitable. Perhaps it is. The news of Kawaguchi's failure spread through Japanese Pacific Command like a virus, infecting every calculation and strategy. Within days, radio intercepts revealed a cascade of reactions from officers who had built their careers on the assumption of American military inferiority. Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, architect of Pearl Harbor, received Kawaguchi's classified report on September 15th and immediately summoned his staff for crisis consultations. Quick succession. Colonel Tsuji Masanobu, Japan's most aggressive strategic planner, cancelled offensive operations across the Pacific pending reassessment of enemy capabilities. General Hyakutake Harukichi, commanding the 17th Army, requested immediate reinforcement of all units engaged with American forces. Multiple perspectives emerged as the reality spread through command structure. Navy intelligence officers who had dismissed American industrial capacity began frantically revising their estimates. Army quartermasters who had calculated Japanese supply requirements based on traditional warrior efficiency suddenly faced the impossible mathematics of fighting an overfed enemy. The most telling reaction came from Colonel Ichiki's replacement, Colonel Shoji Toshiro, who arrived at Guadalcanal in October with explicit orders to avoid direct confrontation with American forces until Japanese supply lines could be reinforced. His first intelligence report was a single devastating sentence: enemy soldiers appear to be operating at performance levels that exceed normal human capability. The psychological effect rippled beyond military command into civilian leadership. Emperor Hirohito's military advisors began privately discussing the implications of fighting a war against an enemy that could afford to waste more resources than Japan could produce. The revelation of American nutritional superiority forced a complete revision of Japanese Pacific strategy. By October 1942, Tokyo had acknowledged that traditional Japanese advantages, discipline, courage, and tactical efficiency, were being systematically neutralized by industrial abundance. Lieutenant General Hyakutake's new tactical directives reflected this reality. Japanese forces would avoid prolonged engagements, focus on disrupting American supply lines, and attempt to force the Americans to fight under conditions that negated their logistical advantages. The strategy represented a fundamental admission that Japan could no longer compete with American forces in direct combat. The technical analysis revealed the depth of American industrial commitment. US forces in the Pacific were consuming supplies at rates that exceeded the entire Japanese military budget. A single American aircraft carrier task force used more fuel in 1 month than the Japanese Navy allocated for quarterly operations. The mathematical gap wasn't closing, it was expanding exponentially. Japanese military planners began developing endurance warfare doctrine based on the assumption that American abundance was unsustainable. They calculated that Americans, accustomed to material comfort, would lose resolve if the war continued beyond their industrial capacity. This analysis would prove catastrophically wrong, but it represented Japan's only rational response to an impossible situation. The adaptation attempts were desperate and telling. Japanese units began targeting American supply dumps rather than combat positions, hoping to force American soldiers to fight on Japanese terms, hungry, undersupplied, and dependent on personal resilience rather than industrial support. The complete acceptance of American superiority came not through dramatic revelation, but through gradual, grinding comprehension of mathematical reality. By November 1942, surviving Japanese officers on Guadalcanal were no longer calculating how to defeat American forces, they were calculating how long they could delay their own inevitable destruction. Colonel Tanaka Raizo, one of Japan's most experienced jungle fighters, documented his transformation in final letters to his family. "I have learned that warfare has changed forever. The Americans have made soldiers into factory workers and factory workers into soldiers. We fight with our spirit against their abundance, but abundance is winning." The last desperate attempts at resistance revealed the futility of traditional military virtues against industrial warfare. Japanese soldiers, reduced to eating roots and leather, continued fighting with extraordinary courage while American forces operated field kitchens that served hot meals within artillery range of enemy positions. The character transformation was complete and captured Japanese communications from the final evacuation. "We withdraw not in defeat, but in recognition of new reality. The enemy has solved the ancient problem of supply and demand through mass production. This is not victory or defeat. This is evolution." The ultimate recognition came from General Hyakutake himself, in classified communications to Tokyo just before the Japanese withdrawal. Guadalcanal has taught us that modern warfare is determined not by the courage of soldiers, but by the productivity of factories. The Americans have created a form of warfare that our traditions cannot counter. Post-battle interviews with surviving Japanese officers revealed a profound shift in military thinking that would influence Japanese strategy for the remainder of the war. Spiritual superiority was meaningless against systematic material abundance. 20 years after Guadalcanal, former Colonel Kawaguchi Kiyotake met with retired Marine General Alexander Vandergrift at a peace conference in Tokyo. Their conversation, recorded by diplomatic observers, captured the long-term implications of that chocolate-fueled campaign. "Your soldiers fought well," Vandergrift offered diplomatically. Kawaguchi's response revealed the enduring lesson. "Your soldiers fought like factory workers, efficiently, systematically, without waste. We fought like artists, with passion and individual excellence, but factories defeat artists when resources are unlimited." The statistical summary of the gap tells the complete story. American forces in the Pacific consumed 2.5 million tons of food during the war, compared to Japan's total military food allocation of 800,000 tons. A single American field army ate more protein in 6 months than the entire Japanese military consumed in 2 years. One profound quote from Japanese war memoirs captured the complete mindset shift. We learned that in modern warfare, abundance is a weapon more powerful than courage. The Americans discovered how to convert industrial capacity into human performance, and we had no answer for this. The universal truth about industrial warfare became clear through Guadalcanal's lessons. Military effectiveness in the modern era is determined not by warrior tradition or tactical brilliance, but by the systematic application of productive capacity to human enhancement. The side that can better feed, equip, and support its soldiers will win regardless of individual courage or tactical skill. Modern relevance connects directly to today's military philosophy. Contemporary special forces nutrition programs, performance optimization through biochemistry, and the integration of technology with human capability all trace their origins to those chocolate bars on Guadalcanal Beach. The Americans didn't just win a battle, they invented a new form of warfare based on the weaponization of abundance itself. The story of Japanese soldiers mocking American chocolate reveals the moment when traditional military thinking encountered industrial reality, and traditional thinking lost forever. Those deration bars weren't just food, they were proof that democracy, productivity, and systematic abundance could be converted into battlefield superiority that no amount of warrior spirit could overcome. In the end, the Japanese learned what every military force since has had to acknowledge. Modern warfare belongs to the side that can best sustain human performance through systematic abundance. The chocolate wasn't luxury, it was the future of conflict itself,